Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Solutions. Today, we're talking about the soul trait of forgiveness. My name is Loyla Lubis. I'm a parenting strategist and life coach for mothers in training, and we are going to explore practical ways to help your child take ownership of this beautiful inner development. So first, as always, let's start by defining our terms. Forgiveness, by definition, is a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness or not. That's the definition. But how do we communicate this complex idea to children, even very young children who won't understand it the first or the second or the third time they hear it? But every time we talk about things, the idea gets a little more familiar. So the definition I like to use for kids, probably starting around the age of 5, maybe a little younger, but definitely by 5, we can say that forgiveness, the definition of forgiveness, is giving up the right to get even or punish someone for doing you wrong. So let me ask you, have you ever found yourself telling your child when you've done something wrong, I'm sorry for saying that thing or doing that thing or being loud or whatever it is, only to feel a frozen wall of rejection and resentment? Sometimes an apology isn't enough. I want to talk in very practical, real ways about forgiveness, about all of us, because forgiveness is not just a childhood issue, right? Forgiveness and navigating those feelings are a lifelong journey. Developing the soul trait of forgiveness takes a lot of work. And if we could start young, just imagine what could happen. So let me share a story with you. I met with an Indian mom who came from a very strict, formal, highly educated family line. I remember listening to this mom share a heartfelt story of remorse and regret. The thing is, she grew up with a very harsh standard of excellence. It was all about the grades. All her family members were doctors and lawyers, and college degrees were just the beginning of what was expected. She felt a very heavy weight of expectation, and that led to resentment even as a child. She did not want that for her. Now she's a mom, and she didn't want that for her daughter. And yet, truth be told, she was doing the very same thing. She was putting a very heavy expectation on her daughter, and it was hurting the relationship. Her own childhood resentments was surfacing, but in this strange role reversal where she was doing the thing she promised herself she wouldn't do. She knew what it felt like to be the child, have all this resentment, have a bad relationship with her mother. It was always over, grades and high expectations and performance, but she couldn't seem to unravel the knot. So my question to you is, how can you parent in such a way that you help your child develop the soul trait of forgiveness, the willingness to let go of retaliation and resentment? Because that's where unforgiveness comes from, right? Resentment. I love visuals. The visual I want to focus on here is, I call this the reciprocity of generosity. Let me unpack that. Being willing to forgive is generous. It's an act of generosity. It's the soul trait. It requires the soul trait of generosity to give something. And over the course of time with our children, it creates a flow, an ease, a reciprocal response from a child. Their willingness to give generosity in the same way that we have modeled it. The reciprocity of generosity. It's packed. It's a packed statement. And we're gonna spend this few minutes unpacking it as best as I know how. The sole trait of generosity is required to overcome the strict scales of justice that often sabotage forgiveness. It's a willingness to forgive in a spirit of generosity that creates and primes the pump for that reciprocity coming and going. So to launch this conversation, I want to share with you from my catalog of 1-minute videos. So if you'll give me one moment, I'm going to share my screen. Nope, I got to stop. Hang on, we got to do that again. Okay. We have no sound.
Hey, you also need to share your sound. If you look on the bottom, it should give you the option.
I'm going to stop my share. All right, I'm going to stop the share. Sorry, guys, we're having some technical difficulties. And I'm clicking share sound.
Okay, now hit play again. Let's see what happens.
No sound.
No sound. There it goes.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to take this back to the beginning. Bear with me. Okay. So let's unpack that. We talked about in this 1-minute video, we talked about 3 possible reasons why a child may be left with so much resentment that they struggle with forgiveness. So we in the video, we looked at number 1, a child may feel violated and justified to feel whatever they're feeling. In this story that I shared with you about the mom who was raised with incredibly high standards and had resentment, her own resentment as a child, this mom felt terrible as a child every single day. She remembered the arguments that she had with her own mom, how much she did not like to do schoolwork, how she struggled to learn as well as maybe, another sibling, or to get straight A's. Or in your story, as you are listening to this, what is your story? What is the thing in your own childhood that left you maybe with resentment, maybe left you with a struggle to forgive some form of injustice? A child forms mindsets. A child comes to conclusions about their value, their worth, their likability. Are they smart enough? Are they strong enough? Are they good enough? Are they something enough? Right? And it always goes back to childhood. The problem was in this particular mom situation that the pressure to perform, there was so much pressure to perform or be rejected. But we all have our own internal story that starts in childhood where the pressure was so much, the inability to communicate or to express the so much, right? And that leads to resentment. And a child may not even realize that they're feeling resentment. Maybe they do, but it's there. You see, as an adult, as we think back to our childhood hurts and pain and stressed out relationships, we can see sometimes where the problem was. And that can fuel resentment. That can keep the resentment going well into adulthood. But the solution is, right, and we're getting back to generosity, is showing generosity in compassion. The gift, the generosity of compassion for a lack of awareness, maybe in our own parents, maybe a generational storyline that just gets repeated, maybe a callousness to what the problem is, maybe for you, just like this particular mom I worked with, she knew her parents were not even aware of any other way to do life. It was unthinkable to not have straight A's and get into the best schools and achieve the highest level of achievement from their perspective. They didn't know any better. But for this particular mom, and maybe for you, the awareness of the injustice leaves you with a feeling of justified resentment. But the solution is compassion. Compassion, maybe without that reciprocity. Maybe, maybe a parent is dead. Maybe a parent is too callous to change, but it is an opportunity for us as moms to model forgiveness through the generosity of compassion. Okay, that's number one. That was the first root cause in the 1 minute video. Another root cause is feeling ignored and feeling like the issue is not resolved, was never resolved. Going back to the mom that I shared with you, her story, there were fights, there were feelings, there were thoughts. This happened day after day after day. It became daily life. The problem is because this mom couldn't articulate as a child, it was never resolved. And maybe that's the case with you as the mom in your own childhood story. And maybe that's the case with your child in your child's story, right? You see how this goes, this cycle happens over and over. But there's so much good news, and we're going to unpack it little by little. You see, the problem is in this feeling ignored and the problem being unresolved is that it impacts the brain. And I know that some of our other amazing teachers have talked about this in the past, but I'm going to bring it up again to refresh your memory and maybe maybe for someone this is brand new information. The brain is wired to fix problems, to remember things that are dangerous and avoid them every time they see it becomes a trigger, right? This survival mode is so strong. And so when there's unresolved trauma, even in relationship, when things happen over and over again, this resentment happens over and over again, the brain picks up on that. And until it is resolved, it will do one or more of three things. The brain will drive you to pick an environment, scenario, or person that replicates the problem so that you can come back and fix it. Or the brain will direct you to provoke the behavior that was unresolved in the past. So maybe we act in ways just like this mom was doing with her own child. She was provoking a very familiar behavior over the same sorts of topics, education, even though she didn't want to. This is how powerful it is. So the second brain function, right, is to provoke. So we either pick a person, place, or dynamic that replicates the problem. We provoke the behavior. I'm saying them out of order. Pick, project, or provoke. So let me talk about project. We may think we're in a dynamic that's familiar when it's really not. There is that potential, like, oh, this is so familiar. I've seen this before. This is happening again, when really from the other person's perspective, it's not the case at all, right? Maybe we think that there is this familiar theme, childhood story playing back again, passing it on to our own child is very familiar, but from their perspective, that's not the case at all. And that's another thing to keep on our radar, is that what we are perceiving as a problem, a familiar problem that creates resentment and lack of forgiveness, may not necessarily be the case in our child's eyes, because they did not live your childhood, my childhood. And that's where communication has to come in. And and the solution in this particular case that I want to highlight is the generosity of mercy, giving up the right to justice, giving up the right to get even, to retaliate in a situation that feels like there's an injustice here, there's resentment here. We want to model forgiveness, the generosity of mercy, of knowing maybe someone does not understand what they're doing. Maybe the child does not understand how they're triggering our own childhood story. Maybe there is a lack of communication when we are projecting that there is an issue, there is resentment, there is unforgiveness, when from the child's perspective, that's not the case at all, right? And it may take the generosity of mercy to prime the pump of communication. Okay, but the last one I want to talk about, and this I'm going to really unpack here, is when a child feels angry and maybe rejected because of an overreactive parent. How many times have we felt something so strongly, something repeats so often, that we kind of overreact? Maybe yell very loud, or say something very mean, or do something very drastic, or threaten something we don't really mean, right? All these things that maybe we realize we overreacted, but now a child is left with feelings of anger, of fear, of feeling rejected, right? In my story with this mom, I keep going back to her, right? I'm going to use her as the example. She was fighting with her child every single day and acting in desperate ways to get results. Can you relate to that? Can you relate to wanting something to happen so badly that you get desperate to make it happen, and in the process hurt the relationship? I know we've all done that. The problem is this mom was losing a loving relationship she wanted with her daughter in exchange for an outcome, right? And because mom could see her story repeating with her child, she knew she wanted it to stop, but she didn't know how. I want to offer you something that I've spoken about in other teachings, but this is a beautiful way for mom to model a very effective, powerful tool. And it's, in this case, for this conversation, will you forgive me? Many times when we say, I'm sorry, we end there, we stop there. And sometimes that's not enough. I want to walk you through a 4-step process of how to ask for forgiveness, how to apologize in a very effective way that opens the door for the generosity of forgiveness. Number 1, admit what you've done wrong. A child should do it, a parent should do it, but right for now, for this conversation, we're talking about modeling a 4-step process for forgiveness, for clearing the air, for finding restoration. What did you do wrong? A child should be able to confess it. A parent should be able to confess it, right? Let's let's tag this thing. Let's be very clear. If I just do something and I say I'm sorry, it's kind of like nebulous. It's murky. It lowers the tension, but it doesn't clear the air. What did I do wrong? Own it, right? Takes humility. Why was it wrong? This is an opportunity to reinforce our value system. Well, if I want us, if honoring each other is high on in my value system, and I called you a name, I said something very mean, I want to confess what I did wrong. I said a mean word to you. It was wrong because I love you. I want us to honor each other, even when we disagree, even when we're having a hard time, even when we're not achieving the thing we would need to achieve, right? Why it was wrong. It highlights, whether it's parent or child, that we understand the underlying value, life principle, life goal behind the symptom. There's lots of symptoms, but there's always an underlying principle, life principle. Number 3, how? How should I have spoken? How should I have responded? What could I have done differently? How? Right? This is valuable because we're now practicing problem solving skills, right? And we continually need to get back into that brain space where we're problem solving, where we are practicing problem solving, which is the front of the brain, the logical problem solving part of the brain, instead of our primitive, I say primate, I don't like that word, um, but of a primitive survival function, right? Where it's just, we're in survival mode. We're not thinking about anyone else. We want to get out of that place and get into the problem solving place in the brain. So how could I have handled that differently? Problem solving. This is good modeling. It's good for children to begin to practice too. And it begins this process of restoration, of clearing the air. There's been an admission of something's wrong, an underlying value system, that a life principle that we're highlighting. We're problem solving. What I could have done differently, what I could do differently next time, which is so valuable because it reinforces that this is not the end all be all. Like, there's another opportunity to get it right, right? It's not the end of the world. And then finally, the ask, the big ask, the big ask, will you forgive me? The reason why I call this the big ask is because it's very easy for one person to feel like the bully, the perpetrator, the wrongdoer, and the other person to feel like the victim. And we want to avoid the victim mentality. When I do the big ask and I say, will you forgive me? I'm now giving the other person, the person that was wronged, now they're in the driver's seat. They have a choice to make. They get to be a decision maker. That feels good. This is something we all like options. We all like a sense of control. And this is a beautiful opportunity to put the other person who was wronged in that position of options, decision making, some sort of control by saying, and you could practically see that cleansing breath happen when this mental process goes on and the wronged party says, okay, I forgive you. They've chosen in the moment to let it go. That is your full process of generosity, of of full restoration, right? Full circle, full circle. Okay, so that's the 4-step process. Now, in our last few minutes, I want to address, what do you do with the resistant child? What do you do with the child who's like, who wants to punish you? The child who says, you're a bad mommy, and maybe they hit, maybe they do something out of their frustration. Maybe they want to punish you for your wrongdoing, right? This happens, maybe not to you, but it's good for you to know if you see it. A lot of times the problem is a lack of clarity in the role, a person's role, their job, and definitions. This is what I mean. The word punishment is a really confusing word, because if we use the word, well, there's going to be a punishment for that behavior, a child may decide they're going to punish you for your behavior. If you can do it, mommy, I can do it. That's role confusion, and that's a lack of clarity on words. The purpose of all consequences is correction. That is the goal. That is number one. It's restoration, it's clarity, it's new learning. It is not a child's job to correct, to teach, to take on that role. There's a level of maturity and relationship that develops over time where a child can offer gentle, respectful correction or a restoration tactic to mom, being like something like, Mom, I remember when you told me blah blah blah, ABC, that I should use kind words even when I'm upset. Mom, you didn't use kind words and I feel hurt. That's a respectful way of a child understanding their role and yet offering respectful course correction even to their parent. But a child who says, you're a mean mommy, you should be punished, and hits or lashes out, does not understand that that is not they do not have the role of teaching, training, helping mom to be more mature. That's not their job. A child's job is to be a child, to learn, to grow, to be free, to explore, right? Let them enjoy that time. They only have it for a little while. And the word punish lacks the true purpose of correction. Correction is the word we want to use, right? Okay, so let's also look real quick at the child who has a calloused heart, meaning you say you're sorry and they don't care. They just don't care. That wall goes up. They don't want to hear a word you've said. Maybe the relationship has been stressed for a long time now, and they've gotten calloused to protect their heart. In that case, it takes patience and respect, time and respect for where your child is at. Usually, this is for an older child. Maybe they're in their teens. Maybe this is an adult child, where you use patience and respect rather than the expectation of reciprocity. You stop expecting for that generosity to come back to you. So it's a one-way generosity where you have humbled yourself. You have said, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And if that other person is not in a place yet to offer the generosity of humility, of um, of respect, of all the different things that we've spoken about, if they don't have that ability of mercy, right, then you have to back off and say, I understand. I understand. I can wait. So with that said, I'm going to stop the recording here, take a look at your questions, and see what else we can